Welcome to Love Thy Lawyer, where we talk with practicing attorneys about their lives and careers. I'm Louis Goodman. Based in Berkeley, California, Megan Wachspress serves as a staff attorney for the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign, where she uses litigation and policy strategies to advance clean energy. She's earned both a Bachelor's of Science and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Chicago, a master's degree from Cambridge, a J.D. from Yale, and a Ph.D. from Cal Berkeley. She has numerous scholarly publications and is clerked for both the California Supreme Court and the Ninth Circuit. Most impressive to me, however, is she is a multi-day Jeopardy champion. Megan Wachspress, welcome to Love Thy Lawyer.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it really is a privilege to have you. I first saw you on television, and it's so much fun to be sitting here and talking to you in person.
It's really fun to be talking to you as well. Honestly, reading through all of those degrees, I was like, wow, I really didn't want a full-time job in my 20s.
Where are you talking to us from right now?
I'm actually in the Sierra Club's national headquarters, the offices here in Oakland, California. Beautiful downtown Oakland, California, as Roman Mars likes to say.
So you are an Alameda County lawyer.
I am. That is where I reside.
Can you tell us a little bit about what type of practice you have now?
It's really varied, which is one of the most fun things about it. The Sierra Club very much is a mission-driven organization, and specifically that mission is to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide and co-pollutants that are put out into the Earth's atmosphere through the generation of electricity in the United States. We have other missions too, the protection of lands, the preservation of species, but the part of the organization that I work in is focused on grid decarbonization. And one of the great things about working for a mission-driven organization is it doesn't necessarily privilege one type of lawyering or one type of legal strategy over the goal of the group as a whole, which is shutting down coal plants, stopping new gas plants, and to a lesser extent, but still promoting the development and installation of solar and wind and increasingly batteries.
Where are you from originally?
I was born in Washington, D.C. My family moved to Oak Park, which is a suburb of Chicago, when I was 3, and then we moved into Chicago proper when I was 10, and that's where I stayed all the way through graduating college.
So where'd you go to high school?
I went to Whitney Young, which is actually the alma mater of Michelle Obama, and the Wachowski sisters. So it's we have some famous alums, but it's a public magnet school very near to downtown Chicago.
And then when you graduated from high school, you went to the University of Chicago, so you stayed kind of close to home, at least for college.
Yeah, I did. I ended up moving down to Hyde Park, so it was a chance to live in the city in a different way and in a different part of it than I had grown up in. After
you graduated from college, you went on to some additional...
A lot of school.
academic schooling, yeah.
A lot of school.
What was the next degree that you got after college?
So I then went to do a master's at Cambridge, which took a year. They do their degrees quick over on the other side of the pond. And then I had previously applied for various PhD programs and kind of knew that when I was done with that master's degree, I'd be coming back to the States to attend the Jurisprudence and Social Policy program at UC Berkeley.
So you went from Chicago to Cambridge to Cal.
Yeah.
And did you take any time off, or did it just go straight through?
Pretty much went straight through. I do think it is a funny expression when people talk about taking time off to go out into the working world in between degrees. I'm like, shouldn't it be the other way around? But no, I was really committed to the idea of becoming a professor. It was the PhD was at the time very much a professional degree for me. I wanted to teach. I wanted to write scholarship. And so I didn't see much reason to wait. It was where I thought I was headed. So I started right away at Cal.
You ultimately went to law school.
Yeah. So my ending up at law school was possibly the most predictable turn of events ever, and one that I weirdly avoided for a very long time. I can remember my senior year of college when my best friend, roommate for 3 years, was reviewing for the LSAT. And I was like, I'm never going to do this. I'm never going to take a standardized test again. So for a long time, I really resisted it.
So when you finished your PhD program, did you immediately then apply for law school?
Oh, no, it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, well, that's my question, which is, it's kind of a sort of a twofold question, probably objectionable as compound. But here's the question. When did you first start thinking about being a lawyer, that's something that you really did want to do?
Yeah.
And then when did you actually apply to law school?
Pretty much simultaneously. Midway through my Ph.D. program, when I decided I definitely did not want to be an academic, and I was spending all of my time volunteering with like asylum applications or teaching Fourth Amendment stuff to kids in San Leandro, in the juvenile facility in San Leandro, and doing union organizing, basically for the graduate student union, teaching assistants union at Cal.
So essentially, you were really doing legal work or legal adjacent work and realized, hey, if I really want to do this, I should be a lawyer.
Yeah,
is that fair
basically,
to say?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. How did you end up all the way on the East Coast from being at Berkeley?
Well, all my professors and my colleagues were like, you should apply to Yale. Yale's the best. And they still thought I was going to be an academic. So like, if you want to go into legal academia, you got to apply to Yale. So I'm like, all right, I'll apply to Yale. So I applied to Yale, and I applied to Berkeley, and then I applied to any law school that waived my application fee. So I never ended up applying to Stanford. People are like, how did you not? I'm like, well, they didn't waive my application fee. So I applied to those two places and then got into some places, didn't get into other places. And Yale was one of the places I got into. And then everyone says, you gotta go, you gotta go, you gotta go. And I'm like, okay, all right. So then I moved across the country.
And how was that experience? How was being in law school at Yale?
Well, I literally drove across the whole country to get there, which was really amazing. And then I drove all the way to get back, which was kind of fun. So I've crossed the country twice by car. New Haven's a very different place than Berkeley. Yale is a very different school than Berkeley. I had, I think, overall a very positive experience there. They have very strong clinical offerings, which I spent most of my time on. And, you know, my colleagues and peers there and many of my professors were just absolutely fantastic. It was the first time in my life I had really, which is ironic given all the places I've been, but it was the first time I saw the reproduction of like U.S. elite political hierarchy in a really concrete way. I was a privileged kid. I've been in privileged places, but this was like the children of like cabinet level positions or senators or the grandchildren of federal judges, like basically slotting into those roles. You know, I think there was a row of students in my civil procedure class who all attended the same private high school in New York City. And so it was frustrating in a political sense. I felt politically activated by seeing the degree to which elite reproduction happened, even almost at like the intergenerational level, and how tightly knit that world was. And that even breaking into a place like University of Chicago, which by any account is like way too exclusive and way too expensive, wasn't the same thing as breaking into like really having power in U.S. society. And being adjacent to that and able to even participate in that a little was a oddly radicalizing experience for someone who had been in what most people would consider pretty elite spaces up until that point.
Now, when you graduated from Yale, did you come back and take the bar in California?
Yeah, I applied for clerkships. I got 2 in California. My then boyfriend, or then fiance, now husband, didn't really want to stay on the East Coast. And so knew that we were moving back to either California or the Midwest, and California was where we ended up.
Hey, can you just very briefly walk us through getting out of Yale, getting a job, doing some of the clerking, and then how that led you to your current position with the Sierra Club?
Yeah. So the clerking thing is a peculiarity of these T14 law schools. It is something that gets really inflated in importance among law school graduates who I think often are very focused on like the next 5 years of their career and don't really see the arc. And also very much like myself, I'm very implicated in this have done nothing but go from like fancy institution to fancy institution to fancy institution. And so they're like, ooh, what's the next fancy institution? And the next fancy institution is the federal judiciary. And there have been a lot of toxic dynamics that have developed around that. And there's been press coverage of some of that. For my part, I was really fortunate in that through no fault, like through no skill on my own, I lucked into just two fantastic human beings as judges. So I knew I only applied for clerkships in New York and Chicago and the Bay Area. I got two in the Bay Area. I came out here. I got to learn some state law, which is great. I got to learn some federal law, also great. And then I actually had my first kid about 3 weeks before my second clerkship was scheduled to end. So I had to leave a little, I mean, I knew it was coming, but I had to leave a little early. And that was also when I finally finished my dissertation. But having my kid, which sort of happened in between my time committing to labor and employment work and actually starting that job, it forced me to think about time, I think, in a different way and project further forward into what was an emergency and what was most urgent and what needed doing in a different way than I think I had previously. And it was also around the time that I think there were a lot of stories about like, no, this is not a 50 years in the future problem anymore. This is a next decade problem.
And it was
climate change. Yeah.
The climate change issue is what led you to the Sierra Club.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to do climate work, and I applied a bunch of places, and this was the group that would have me. So there you go. To make of that what you will.
Obviously, you are someone who is super bright. You have lots of skills. You could do anything that you want. What is it about practicing law that you like and that has kept you in the legal world?
I'm not sure that's true. Can I reject the premise? I mean, I actually have been really specialized. Like, all of my work has been about closely reading texts and analyzing them and writing about texts, right? Whether those texts are like 17th century pamphlets or 21st century cases from a public utility commission. Like the honing the skill of writing about texts and teaching the skill of writing about texts has really been what I've done. And so
practicing law is to some extent the reading of text, the writing about text, and the analysis of text, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying is that I don't know. I've been incredibly specialized in my life, actually. I don't know that there is something else that like I could just pop into and do well. But what has kept me practicing law? I mean, for me, it's a way to fight for the world to be a better place, but to fight in a really nerdy way. And it is, like I said, that's the skills I've been honing since I was a kid. And so if I want to be fighting, why not fight with the skills I'm actually decently good at, as opposed to, I don't know, trying to go out and I have scientist friends who are like trying to develop carbon capture technology. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. So, you know.
Speaking of scholarly work, you wrote a really fascinating piece about piracy in the, 16th century, 17th century?
Well, 16th and 17th, yeah.
And so I mean, that touches on criminal law. And when I was in college, I studied a lot of American colonial history, and there was a big piracy component of that. So I was really interested when I took a look at that article, and I'm wondering if you could just briefly explain what that article was about and why that subject was interesting to you. And I would just indicate to anybody who's listening, it's easy enough to Google it and find it.
The big thing that got me politically activated was Guantanamo and the disappearance of Muslim American men shortly after September 11th. Like, that was the first protest I attended. And I was very upset. You know, I was like a little high school civil libertarian. This is outrageous, blah, blah, blah. I don't mean to minimize it. Sorry. It was outrageous. It was horrible. The legacy in U.S. history is atrocious. Guantanamo is still open. Like, it's not in the past. It's happening. But at the time, a lot of the rhetoric in left of center circles was, oh, this is exceptional. What we're doing to these people is exceptional, right? The solution is to treat folks who we think have done these horrible things like regular criminals. And then as I got a little older and I got got to see what a regular criminal proceeding looked like and go inside a regular prison, it became clear to me that like regular prison isn't actually, it's different and there are different horrors, but regular prison isn't great either. And that distinction, that idea that there are like special criminals and regular criminals and the legal frameworks we have for thinking about them are very different things, got me interested in the origins of that distinction. And what I discovered in looking into those origins is, one, the idea of the criminal law as a coherent body of law that is enforced through public mechanisms like prosecutors is actually quite new. You don't see it as a coherent body of law until the 19th century. Public prosecutors, as in people employed by the state to pursue legal consequences for individuals accused of wrongdoing, really you don't get until very late 19th century, early 20th century in the US and Britain. And I'm talking here about the Anglo-American legal tradition, the common law tradition. And the counterintuitive thing I discovered, and which is the subject of the paper, is that when in the early years of the development of criminal procedure and within political thought of the idea of lawbreaking as a basis or justification for state violence, the figure that was focused on, the idea that people had in their heads was not like the person who steals their neighbor's chickens or the person that commits an assault, but the pirate, the highwayman, who were in international law, the enemy of all, who were outside any kind of norms of what you can do to a person. They were outside of even the barest minimal of social contract in the international sphere. And a lot of the legal, this isn't part of that paper, it is part of my dissertation, and the legal protections we think of as so fundamental to defendants' rights in the U.S. actually have their origins in a 1696 bill that was relating to treason. So traitors had more legal protections from a procedural standpoint than quote unquote ordinary criminals did for a decent several decades in the early 18th century. So the point of the paper and the point of the dissertation is to posit that, in fact, if you look at the intellectual history of the idea of criminality in the Anglo-American tradition, rather than having regular criminals and extraordinary criminals, the idea that criminals are outside of social bounds and subject to pretty limitless violence is really deeply embedded in that intellectual tradition. And what I wanted to do, but what my advisors are like, now, Megan, this is a historical dissertation. Like, let's not get ahead of ourselves, is then try to pull that forward and say, well, let's go over to Pelican Bay up and down Norte and look at Pelican Bay and look at Guantanamo. And you try to tell me which you'd rather be in. The answer, of course, is none of the above, but just to point out that we do some extraordinarily cruel things to quote-unquote ordinary criminals.
As I mentioned in the introduction, you are a multi-day Jeopardy champion. What got you interested in going on Jeopardy? And can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Yes. So when I was in middle school, it might not shock you to learn that I was not the most popular of kids, but I did have one really good friend. Every day, we'd get home from school, we'd go to our respective, I would go in the kitchen because you could still pull the phone cord over to the TV, it was all corded phones, and turn on the TV, and we would play Jeopardy against each other with scorekeeping every afternoon after school for at least a year and a half. She always won, every time. She was a year older than me, but she always won. And I think I haven't consistently watched Jeopardy all my life since then, but I'm a big trivia fan. I'm in an online trivia league. I always trying to get people to go to pub quiz with me. Before I had kids, I was always trying to get people to go pub quiz with me. And Jeopardy recently changed its format. So now you can take the test to be on the show anytime. You don't have to do it at certain times. And my husband did it fairly early in the pandemic. I was like, Megan, you should do this. Of course you should do this. I'm like, all right, I'll do it. And that was it. I got enough right. I went through the whole audition process. So it much like becoming a lawyer, it was the product of long-standing childhood structural factors and a real spontaneous decision decades later that was not necessarily well thought out.
What did you think of the experience of being on the show?
It was fantastic. It was so much fun. The contestant producers are amazing. They've got it down. Everything's very efficient. Everyone's very warm and friendly and enthusiastic, and all the other contestants are always really nice to each other. It's like a very good vibes. It is, you realize like this is a big thing they're doing. They're just pulling people off, not off the street, but with like not a ton of vetting and like putting them on television and like kind of hoping it works. And the fact that it does, I think, is a credit to all of the producers involved in the show and just the fact that I think there is a correlation between being good at trivia, which requires a certain amount of curiosity, a certain kind of amount of diversity of interest, right? You can't just know about one thing. You've got to be interested in lots of things. That invites people who are open to an experience and likely to be, have fun with it and show courtesy to their fellow contestants.
Now, you did well enough that you were invited to the Tournament of Champions. Has that taping taken place yet?
It has, and that is all I can say about it.
Oh, I know. It's revealing state security secrets to say anything beyond that.
Yeah.
So anyway, and so I assume that taping experience
check
was
your
also
local
good.
listings. Yeah, no, that experience was really good. And normally when you film, you're like, everyone's in and out for a day, right? Like, except for the person who wins on the last show of the day, because they film 5 shows a day.
Right.
So only the person who's the winner on the last day comes back, and it's all new people. But the tournament is when they have everybody out. They have, and they like let everyone stay even after they lose, to watch the subsequent rounds. And so it was an incredible bonding experience actually with the other contestant participants. You get to spend several days in a row with them, and they're incredible people, and it was incredible to get to know them a little bit.
Megan, I have a 2-parted question for you. What do you think's the best advice you've ever received? And what advice would you give someone who was just coming out of law school and starting a career?
So the best advice I ever received was from a friend, and it was in the context of dating. She's very successful at dating. Someone's always in love with her. I am not so successful at dating. I was not. Obviously, I'm married now, but I was not. And the advice she gave to me is, Megan, you can't approach this thinking about scarcity. And I know that that's a privileged perspective across the board, right? Like, there are situations where things genuinely are scarce. Like, there are people in this world that do not have enough money, do not have enough food. That is real. But I think that there are a lot of situations where we invent scarcity, or we cling to things, or get emotionally attached to things because, or even worse, hold on to things or fight other people for things because we think of things that are scarce that are actually in abundance, right? And so that advice really resonated with me because it's like, oh yeah, I get so upset every time, something doesn't work out because I'm subconsciously thinking like, oh, maybe there's no one out there in the world for me. And so once you say, you know what, there are plenty of people out there in the world who I could have a wonderful dating experience. This is so bizarre to talk about when I've been married for 7 years, but it opens you up to experiences and just helps you to make better choices too, to say, you know what, this person isn't for me, right? I don't have to cling to this person because there is more stuff out there. And the kind of related advice I would give, professional advice I would give to someone starting out their career is to not let your idea of who you are or what your life is supposed to look like keep you in a situation or keep you around people or keep you doing work that for whatever reason doesn't make sense for you. Either you're not sleeping, you're not happy with it, you don't feel good about it at the end of the day. That I think clinging to an idea of how things should be, which is something I do all the time, can really lead you into unhappiness, and trying to take a step back and let go of that narrative for yourself as much as possible.
I'm wondering how practicing law and your family life have fit together.
I have a 5-year-old and a toddler. It's not an easy fit. It really isn't. I mean, basically we work between 8 and 10 right? Like, there's just this second shift after the kids are in bed where you do all the work that you couldn't get done during the limited hours of childcare that you have every day. There's been so much written, so much ink spilled on this, can you have it all, and blah, blah, blah. And I have my opinions on that and the gender dynamics of all of that. But I think it is hard, but I think it's a privilege to get the chance to do both. Not everyone does. And so I am grateful to be in a job that is hard, but with kind people who show me grace and flexibility when I need it. And I am grateful to have kids who are an absolute joy to be around and who will, hopefully, I don't even know, hopefully they're just going to be part of my life forever. It's amazing.
What sort of recreational activities do you like to do to kind of get your mind off of work?
My husband and I love outdoors stuff, especially with the pandemic. The last 3 years, we've been very much on the conservative side of things. And so we have covered a really incredible amount of California, the Sierras, up to Lassen, up to, Mendocino County, down to LA. We took a boat ride to the Channel Islands because we wanted to hit as many national parks as possible. So a lot of, trying to cajole the 4, then 5-year-old to walk, like, just another half mile, kiddo. And so that's a lot of recreational activities.
How do you define success?
Oh, I don't know. If I've left the world better off for having me in it.
What keeps you up at night?
The inevitability of death. Like, seriously? I mean, climate change is the obvious one, but yeah. And all the stupid things I've said at various points in my life, including on national television. But yeah, those 3 things.
Is there someone living or dead who you'd really like to meet? And if so, what would you ask them or talk to them about?
I mean, it's hard because I think anyone who I really admired, I just get really tongue-tied around. My younger child, their middle name is after Pauli Murray, who is one of the most influential legal thinkers in U.S. history. They conceived of the legal theory behind Brown versus the Board of Ed. Ruth Bader Ginsburg credited them with a lot of the legal inspiration and thinking and work behind the early women's rights cases and gender equity cases in the 1970s. They were the first Black woman Episcopal ordained minister at the end of their life. I'm being a little bit weird with the pronouns because there's historical debate about Pauli identified as male at points in their life, never fully socially transitioned because that wasn't really an option for them. And so there's historical debate over which pronouns are most appropriate to use. However that comes out, they're just an incredible human being. And I think in terms of, what is the dream of having your ideas make the world a better place? I just can't think of anyone whose ideas made the world a better place in such a concrete, wide-ranging way.
And can you slowly say that name one more time?
Pauli Murray, Pauli Murray.
Thank you. Let's say you and your husband came into some real money. Not Jeopardy winnings, but $3 or $4 billion. What, if anything, in your life would you do differently?
What would I do differently? Oh, this is so pathetic, but I'd probably just keep working at my job. I mean, I know that there are these billionaire philanthropists that go around. And I think giving money away smartly and ethically involves work. And so I think to the extent that I did things differently, it would be about figuring out how to give the money away as ethically and carefully and productively as possible, which would be a lot of work and require talking to a lot of people. You hear these stories of these people parachuting in and then doing these programs, and then it doesn't grow out of local people's needs, and it doesn't grow out of local knowledge, and so you end up doing more harm than good. And so trying not to do that with the money would, I think, become my full-time job.
Yeah, I think having a lot of money creates a lot of problems in a way.
Yeah, well, it gives you power, and really disproportionate power. And so I'm uncomfortable with the idea of having that much power. Well, I'm tempted by it too, I guess, but.
Let's say you had a magic wand. There was one thing in the world that you could change, the legal world or otherwise. What would that be?
I mean, besides shutting down every coal plant and spontaneously replacing it with a combination of batteries, solar panels, and wind generators, I mean, I'm really concerned about, this is getting very political, but I'm really concerned about the current makeup of the federal judiciary. I think it's going to be very hard to do good policy going forward and to protect folks' rights going forward with the current state of things. So do something about that. And yeah, just spontaneously get rid of fossil fuels. All gone. We've decarbonized the grid. Boom.
Is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't discussed, that we haven't touched on?
You've asked some good questions. I've said my piece.
Megan Wachspress, thank you so much for joining me today on the Love Thy Lawyer podcast. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you as well.
That's it for today's episode of Love Thy Lawyer. If you enjoyed listening, please share it with a friend and follow the podcast. If you have comments or suggestions, send me an email. Take a look at our website at lovethylawyer.com, where you can find all of our episodes, transcripts, photographs, and information. Thanks to my guests, and to Joel Katz for music, Brian Matheson for technical support, Paul Roberts for social media, and Tracy Harvey. I'm Louis Goodman.
So what got me interested in the topic, I'll answer the questions in the reverse order.